How do we honor the life of Francis L. McIntosh? How do we remember his death? How do we speak truth about the racism, domestic terror, and genocide that killed him, that still haunts this city today, and yet not lose sight of the man, the human being, that worked this river, that strolled these streets, that was loved and loving? There is the tendency to focus on the trauma, on the brutality, the barbarity of the mob, on the corruption, the cruelty of quote-unquote law enforcement, the judge, the police who savagely scapegoated him, on the flames, on the terror. We are right to keep these close, to remember, to never forget what was done to this man. But that does not honor his life, nor does it account for the impact of his death.
Francis was murdered, lynched on this day in 1836. But this ripple effect of his death would be felt for decades, indeed now for almost 2 centuries. The abolitionist publisher and white ally, Elijah Lovejoy, was so anguished by the lynching of Francis McIntosh that he declared in an editorial that his murder had ended all pretense of law, order, and democracy in St. Louis.
The city must now be considered a totalitarian state. In the aftermath of his reporting of the McIntosh lynching, Lovejoy was forced to flee across the river to Illinois. Within a year and a half of Francis McIntosh's lynching, a white supremacist mob would slay him too, engulfed in flames, in a hell of bullets, just like the man he had tried to memorialize. Upon hearing of these atrocities, and inspired by the revolts of Nat Turner and Gabriel Prosser, a young John Brown would soon swear on a Bible, quote, "Here, before God, in the presence of these witnesses, from this time, I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery." Here were men of a different hue, a different social location, may as well have been a different world, but they saw the divinity of Francis McIntosh and of Lovejoy after him. They understood the holy humanity in which we are all woven. It would be another 20 years, but in December of 1858, John Brown would lead a raid in western Missouri, liberating nearly 24 human beings from enslavement, from the same forces of totalitarianism that killed Francis McIntosh, and leading them on a perilous winter's journey north to Chatham, Ontario, Canada, where they were delivered onto the caring arms of freedom's greatest soldier in North America, General Harriet Tubman.
This is the legacy, the long arc, the interconnected and the interdependent movement of liberation that was born of the tragic lynching of Francis McIntosh. Our ancestral activists, agitators, accomplices, and armed resistors that are forged in trauma but march on. And yet, we are still just telling stories. We are remembering death and speaking truth about terror and justice. And yet, how do we honor the life of a man who did not consent to his martyrdom? How do we honor the life of a man who should never have died like that? The birth of a movement hasn't brought back Michael or George or Brianna. And it can't bring back Francis. We must listen to his words. We must hear his plea. I feel as much as any of you. And so, we must think of what Francis felt, what he tasted, what he smelled, what he saw, just not in his horrific death, but in his all too short but beloved life.
As we think about the lives of these brave fighters, the lives of the lost, and the lives of the unknown, we remember. We remember Lucy Delaney. We remember Mary Meacham and John Barry Meacham. We remember Francis McIntosh. Their stories will not go untold, and we will continue to tell these stories. We remember.